So hi. First of all, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And so I was wondering, how have you found being on a show connected to DC Comics?
I've found it incredible. The most amazing thing has been, a DC comic show comes with a built-in audience that is
Sure.
so excited. And this audience in particular has been so supportive and so loving. It's been incredible to be a part of it.
Right. And when did your journey with acting originally start? Was it always intended that you'd pursue it as a profession?
Oh, well, my journey was a little convoluted. There were some twists and turns along the way. I didn't start out acting. I actually started out in the corporate world,
Hmm.
in finance. And to take it back further to childhood, I suppose, my parents moved to the U.S. from Pakistan. So
Right.
as immigrants, in their mind, they had a certain set number of professions that were okay for their children to pursue, and acting is not one of them.
Hmm.
So growing up, I remember wanting to be an actor and even mentioning that to my parents as a child, and it was turned down. So
Right.
I initially did the responsible thing. I studied economics and I worked in finance and ultimately found that that wasn't fulfilling. Um, Life brought me to Los Angeles, and I thought, well, there's no better time or place than for me to start pursuing what I've always wanted to do.
Hmm.
And I found myself taking acting classes and just throwing myself into that world. I haven't looked back.
Wow. I'm sure you and Eric Goins must have had stuff to talk about then. He had a similar kind of start, didn't he? He was in the corporate world. He was telling me
That's
that when I
right.
spoke to him.
That's right. He did. Actually, I think a few of us ISA members have had a similar, well, maybe not similar, but not a straightforward journey into acting. I think
Hmm.
even Neil Jackson pursued some other professions or other
Yeah.
interests first. And yeah, it is interesting to see how people find their way into acting.
And I guess speaking of acting and other actors, you've got a similar name to a famous Bollywood actress. And I was wondering, has that caused any kind of confusion for you in terms of
It
like maybe, yeah.
It certainly has. So,
Mm.
yes, I believe she pronounces it differently. So, I pronounce my name Hina with a short
Right.
I. I
Mm.
believe she pronounces it Hina, but
Sure.
it's spelled exactly the same. So, if you Google, so our name, Hina Khan, is actually a very common South Asian name. It's
Right.
like in the US, like, being named Jennifer Smith. It's just very
Mm.
common. So, uh, first of all, it's a very when you Google the name, it's so common you'll get a lot of hits. But then this actor, she's a Bollywood actress, and I believe she's one of the top TV Bollywood actresses in India.
Right. Yeah.
So if you Google my name, you will find loads of photos of her, and then you might find one of me. So
Yeah.
what was happening is when the Stargirl announcement and casting announcements came out,
Mm.
I there were articles that would be published and it would be written about me, but then they would tag a photo of her.
Sure.
And so that was definitely a little confusing, I think, for people. But what I had started doing, what I've always done, is added an X in the middle of my name, just
Yeah.
any kind of username. It's my full name is never available. So
Right.
I've always done that, and I just started putting that in on IMDb and other places so that you could actually look up Hina X Khan and then I
Right.
show up. So just like a point of differentiation help myself and help others out there searching.
Right. So is X an orphan initial, or do you have a middle name that starts with it, or was it just like you come up with an initial to have the differentiation?
It was just the coolest initial I could think of.
Sure. Right. And kind of jumping to a different area. Obviously, you're on Stargirl, as we kind of already briefly mentioned. How well do you remember your first day on that set? Is there anything that stands out in your mind?
Oh, wow, my first day. My first day, the first scene that I shot actually got cut from
Right.
the first episode. It's a scene that takes place after the commotion in the cafeteria, and I sort of drag Courtney Whitmore Breck's character away.
Yeah.
So the following scene was actually shot before the cafeteria one. The following scene is me with her in the principal's office, and
Sure.
just both of us kind of sizing each other up. Like, this is a new girl in school and she's causing trouble. And for
Mm.
her, she's in a new school in a new neighborhood in town. So that was the first scene, and I just remember how quickly it went. And that's always the case with acting. That's what they always say, is actors get paid to wait. We spend so
Right.
much time waiting, whether it's in our trailers or waiting for an audition or waiting for whatever, that the actual time that it takes for you to complete a scene seems like it goes by in a blink of an eye.
Right.
Even though there's been so much anticipation up to that point.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember it just going by so quickly and feeling like, wow, this is a well-run machine. If you just got an idea of how much they've put into it, both in terms of just the passion of the production, the creators, Jeff Johns, and just how much it costs to put together something that looks as amazing as it does.
Right. And as someone who's on Stargirl, how has it been to see the show become like such a big success, like from like internally?
It's been really a nice feeling to see how people have embraced it. You just
Mm.
don't know when you're filming it. They, as people say, is performances, and the show is really made in the editing room. So
Yeah.
we see our bits and pieces of it. We can imagine what the total outcome is going to look like, but really, I couldn't have imagined as wonderfully as it turned out.
Mm. And we learn during the season that Principal Bowen was the wife of the original Fiddler. So before she took up the mantle, how aware was she, do you think, of like the ISA and what her husband was doing with that?
Oh, I think she was well aware. All of this is not, it's backstory that as actors you create for yourselves, because rarely is it that you are told, well, it would be nice if you got like a little handbook on, here's this person, this character from childhood
Sure.
until now, but you don't
Yeah,
get that.
yeah.
So you sort of create that on your own. And based on the character and where her journey took her, I would venture to say that she was very well aware of the ISA and of their mission. Perhaps didn't agree with a lot of how it was executed,
Hmm.
but definitely aware of what was going on.
Right. And I would say that your character subverts the expectations of a principal in a show like this because they're normally quite a separate character. So, like, how did that kind of feel to be technically playing a principal when that's not really an important part of the character because she's in the ISA?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I got the role, I didn't know that they kept everything as it is with most shows of this nature, everything very hush hush, so you don't
Mm.
necessarily even know what you're auditioning for. I did know that I was auditioning for a principal. I did
Right.
not know that it was also going to be a supervillain. When I got the script for the first episode and the characters were listed out, my character was listed out as Principal Anaya Bowin / the Fiddler. So right up front on the first day, I knew that I was also had this alter ego. However, a lot of the cast, I don't think paid that much attention to the character list. And when it was finally revealed, maybe it was the episode with Eric, I think, when or actually even before that, I think when I go into Brainwave's room and start fiddling that little tune, I think the rest of the cast sort of stopped and said, "Oh, wait, you're Fiddler." So even some of the cast members at first thought, "Oh, well, she's the principal who's kind of strict, and that's about it." But it's interesting to see that as a character that is the principal sort of seems an innocuous character that's going to be sort of a wallflower. You don't imagine that she's part of a villainous society.
Right. And speaking of that villainous society, I've spoken to a few of your fellow ISA members, and they've discussed the strong bonds formed between the actors in the group. And I was wondering what your experience with them was like.
Oh, they're the best. If anyone were to have seen us sort of behind the scenes having our ISA meetings, they would not have taken us seriously.
Right.
We definitely did not match the personalities that we were conveying of these very focused evil villains. We were just having a blast, poking fun at each other. We got very, very lucky with the cast of that's the ISA, all just incredibly good, funny, talented humans, and we got along so well. I think we were harder to control than the quote unquote children.
Right.
We were just having too much fun.
Yeah, and actually, again, speaking of the children, the ISA would have found out who the new JSA were, and obviously Bowen would have potentially known some of them personally. So how do you think she would have felt when it became known to her?
Well, I wonder if the sort of backstory of the ISA, what that is in terms of was Principal Bowen an educator and also a villainess, or is it that these villains showed up into Blue Valley and then assumed roles that would put them in positions? And was it that, well, why don't you take on the role of a principal? And why doesn't the gambler take on the role that he did at Blue Valley Tires? And why not put ourselves in positions where we have oversight into the areas of this town that we would need? And certainly one of the places, if you're going to brainwash millions, one of the places to have oversight is perhaps a high school where you have interaction with these students and their parents and have a level of influence. So I would like to think that was a very intentional thing, that it wasn't that she happened to be a principal by chance, that it was intended to be that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perspective I never thought of. But then, as you say that, I'm thinking there might have been implied similar thing with the wizard, how they kind of got him to be the councilman, and that's quite a position of power in the community. So that's probably a similar thing to what you're saying.
Right, to plant these characters in positions where they can wield some amount of influence and and privy to what's going on in the town.
Right. And you kind of touched on this already, but when you think of the characters and the other cast members, is there anyone that comes to mind who's completely different in real life?
Oh, wow. I think most of the villains are completely different in just the sense of they are just such pleasant individuals to be around.
Yeah.
That it's funny to see them as villains. I think one of the characters that seems so much like one of the actors that seems so much like their characters actually
Right.
going the opposite direction is Luke Wilson.
Ah,
He is so, and not that, he builds giant robots in his spare
mm,
time, but he is so goofy and affable, and that is both him and the character. You
right.
just you just can't help but love him and also look at him and be like, "Do you know what you're doing?"
Mhm.
Because he's so goofy and that's just his humor and charm and it's so effortless with him.
Yeah, and that's really cool to hear. I feel like a lot of people would have potentially been endeared to his character, and that'd probably be pleasing to people to hear that he's similar to that in real life. And speaking of other people who are on the show, obviously, Max France plays Isaac, your son, on the show. And how conscious were you two of like your scene in episode 12 and what it could potentially be setting up?
Very much so. That was that scene in the principal's office where he's been bullied and he comes
Mm,
in upset about that. That was the first time you really see a close interaction with this mother parent child relationship.
yeah,
You don't you sort of see that Principal Bowen is very protective of her son just based on the things she says in the ISA meetings, but you don't actually see the interaction between the two.
right,
And it's written in where there is a moment where you see that she's sort of struggling with that decision of is she going to continue to be overprotective and coddle him, or is she going to let him in a little bit on, well, maybe this is what you should think about in terms of defending yourself. Here's what your father did.
right.
So, and then at the end of that scene, he looks over at his tuba,
Mm.
just, indicating what's to come in the next episode of what can he do with that instrument as a defense tool.
Sure. I'm not sure how much you read or saw when episode 12 came out, but I think it was kind of like divided on what that scene was trying to get across. Because I think some people thought it was just meant to be some kind of like comedic thing, like what's he going to do with the tuba? But then I think other people were saying, well, no, look up his name in relation to DC Comics, and I think it's pretty clear what they're trying to do. So I thought that was interesting.
Right. I guess we'll have to wait for season 2 to
Right.
see what he does exactly with based on the origin material and you look at his character in the comics, that would be now the third iteration of the Fiddler, at least
Mm,
in Stargirl, right? But he is not a violinist so far.
yeah.
He does play the tuba. So
Mm,
Neil Jackson and I were joking. We did a live takeover on the CW. He did one, and I was
yeah.
speaking to him, and he was talking about how well we were saying it's a cumbersome instrument to carry around.
Right.
If you're a villain and are sneaking into places to try to hypnotize people, it would be more difficult to do with a tuba. So I would imagine that he's going to take up violin very quickly,
Mm.
but we'll have
Uh,
to see what happens.
right. And obviously, Stargirl has a large cast of characters. And were there any storylines that you enjoyed following either while reading the scripts or watching it play out on TV?
It's so different reading the script and then actually seeing it on television. So
Right.
watching it was really incredible, especially like I said, because when you edit performances together, you cut the scenes together. It's a visual medium. So
Right.
watching it, one of the storylines that I really enjoyed was Wildcat,
Mm.
Yolanda. Watching how, and I think actually Stargirl has done a great job of painting a picture of how these characters came to be who they are today. So you see it with with Yolanda's character, how she was bullied and how she was a sweet girl, and with the incident that happens with her boyfriend, how that changes her. And I think that's something that's so relatable. It's one thing when you look at a character, especially with the villains, and you think, okay, well, they're just evil. But when you take a step back and look at where they came from, it's insightful to see that everybody has a story, and you can really relate to it, because whether it's on TV or somebody that you know in real life, you begin to understand that everyone is who they are because of the path that they've been on. So I really enjoyed watching that.
Right. And this is actually the last question I've got here. And is there anything you'd particularly like to say to fans of the show who are watching over the past 13 weeks?
Oh, I would like to express my deep gratitude for how wonderfully supportive they have been and how much love they've shown Stargirl. You never know when you make a show how it's going to be received, and the reception of Stargirl has been truly amazing and humbling. So I hope that they will come back and show the same support for season 2.